Unsurprisingly, Trump's latest peace plan for Ukraine wasn't well received when it was leaked at the end of last week. However, in the past couple of days, both Ukraine and its European allies have reluctantly engaged with Trump's proposal, and now it looks like it might have legs. So in this video, we're going to take another look at the deal, and why it's yet more proof that Europe needs to reduce its reliance on the US and improve its so-called strategic autonomy. The TLDR Black Friday sale is now on. That includes our biggest ever discounts on all products, including our coffee table book, our 2025 calendars, our colouring book, posters starting at $17.99, and much more. Find the full collection at toolong.news or by clicking the link in the description. Offer ends December 3rd. So, given that since the last time we did a video on this topic, the text of the actual peace deal has been leaked, let's start with that. A bit like Trump's 20-point Gaza plan, this deal is made up of 28 points, with varying levels of detail. The first 4 points are basically one big, vaguely worded promise that Ukraine, Russia, and Europe are gonna get on great in the future. Point 5 says that Ukraine will, quote, receive reliable security guarantees, which also sounds a bit vague. But Axios has reported that there is an additional document with more details, including that, quote, the US and its NATO allies would treat an attack on Ukraine as an attack on the entire transatlantic community. Point 6 says that Ukraine's army will be limited to 600,000 personnel, down from about 900,000 at the moment. Points 7 and 8 say that Ukraine isn't going to join NATO and that NATO troops won't be stationed in Ukraine. Point 9 says that, quote, European fighter jets will be stationed in Poland, which seems to actually mean US fighter jets won't be stationed in Poland. Point 10 lays out some more details about the security guarantee, including that the US will receive, quote, compensation, presumably from Ukraine's European allies. Point 11 says that Ukraine can join the EU. Point 12 says some vague stuff about Ukraine's reconstruction. Point 13 says that Russia will be reintegrated into the global economy, including its inclusion in the G8. Point 14 says that $100 billion of Russia's frozen assets will be used for Ukraine's reconstruction, with the US receiving 50% of the profits, topped up with $100 billion from Europe. Points 15 and 16 are basically saying that Russia will be legally obliged to abide by the peace deal, while points 17, 18 and 19 say that the US, Russia and Ukraine will restart cooperation on nuclear non-proliferation under the NPT, with energy from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant split 50-50 between Russia and Ukraine. Point 20 obliges Russia and Ukraine to implement educational programs aimed at promoting mutual understanding. Point 21 is a pretty controversial one, obliging Ukraine to give up the remaining territory it controls in Donbass, which will become a demilitarized buffer zone. Point 22 says that neither side will violate the deal. Point 23 says that Ukraine can use the Dnipro River for trade purposes. Point 24 talks about the creation of a humanitarian committee to organize prisoner exchange and family reunification. Point 25 says that Ukraine will hold elections in 100 days. Point 26 says that both sides will receive total amnesty for all war crimes. Point 27 says that the deal's implementation will be monitored by a new peace council headed up by, unsurprisingly, Trump. And finally, point 28 says that once both sides agree to the deal, there will be an immediate ceasefire. Unsurprisingly, the immediate reaction from Kyiv was furious. Ukrainian officials likened it to a capitulation, and Zelensky gave an impassioned speech warning Ukraine that it now had to choose between its biggest ally and its dignity. This reaction was understandable. The deal required Ukraine to make a whole load of unpalatable concessions, including giving up territory it currently controls in Donbass, restricting the size of its army, and an amnesty on Russian war crimes. However, in the past day or so, Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have toned down their rhetoric and started engaging with the deal, although Zelensky has still ruled out ceding further territory. And this apparent softening makes strategic sense for two reasons. First, contrary to what Trump likes to imply, this deal is nowhere near finished, and a number of provisions will require substantial negotiations. There's no detail, for instance, on what the, quote, comprehensive non-aggression agreement might look like, or the global package of measures to rebuild Ukraine, or the sequencing of sanctions relief for Russia. Ukraine presumably hopes that nominally agreeing to the deal will put pressure on Russia to accept a ceasefire, while paving the way for future negotiations where Ukraine and its European allies could gradually make the case against the deal's more onerous provisions. And if Ukraine can negotiate out the worst bits of the deal, there are other bits for Ukraine to like. The idea of US security guarantees, for instance, is something that Russia has previously refused to even countenance, as is the idea of using Russia's assets for Ukraine's reconstruction. It's also worth noting that while Ukraine has balked at the idea of drawing down its military at all, a 600,000 force would still be the largest in Europe and a far cry of the total demilitarization that Russia previously demanded. The second reason that Ukraine is engaging with the deal is that, again, contrary to popular opinion, Putin hasn't actually agreed to it either. Rather, in comments he made on Friday, Putin said that he believed that the deal, quote, could serve as a foundation for a final peace settlement, but implied that further negotiations were required and that Russia would not agree to any ceasefire until the ambiguities in the plan had been ironed out. If Ukraine were to nominally accept the deal, it's very possible that Russia would refuse the idea of an immediate ceasefire, helping Ukraine convince Trump, once again, that Putin is the primary obstacle to peace, and averting a sudden withdrawal of US support. For the most part, Ukraine's European allies have taken a similar tone, and done what they do best: kick the can down the road and buy Ukraine some more time. But in the longer term, the events of this past week should serve as yet more proof that Europe really needs to reduce its strategic dependence on the US. The US clearly isn't a reliable ally anymore. Only a couple of weeks ago, Trump was whacking sanctions on Russia's oil majors, and everyone thought that he was back on Ukraine's side. And now he's back to parroting Russian talking points. Trump's fickleness has paralyzed Europe. Whenever Trump turns on Ukraine or NATO, we hear a lot of grand rhetoric about the imminent need for European strategic autonomy. But whenever Trump turns back, European leaders seem to get overly optimistic that Trump might be a secret Atlanticist and lapse back into complacency. By now, however, it should be overwhelmingly clear that the US just isn't a reliable partner for Europe. And furthermore, this deal is just bad for Europe. It puts European taxpayers on the hook for both the US security guarantee, and who knows how much Trump will demand in, quote, compensation, as well as Ukraine's reconstruction, while the US gets to profit from frozen Russian funds. Strategic autonomy is the only way to give Europe more sway in these negotiations, and guard against this sort of extortion. And if you're interested in this topic, we dive even deeper into the theory of victory for Ukraine in our magazine Too Long. Plus, this Black Friday, we're running our cheapest price ever, with new subscribers getting their first copy as cheap as $2.99. As you can see, the magazine is titled The New Middle East, and in it, we run through each country in the region and discuss their future, before reflecting on how recent events have reshaped the Middle East forever. We obviously talk about the Middle East a lot in videos, but this is our most zoomed out, detailed and thought through coverage yet, truly outlining how we see this region re-emerging. It's not just that though, there have also been a lot of major elections this year. So in this issue, we have a whole section talking about all of the major elections that have taken place this year, and how global politics has changed. China's continued dominance, politics in the UK, and how politicians have hijacked social media. This latest issue is now available for pre-order on our website, and if you subscribe using the code BLACKFRIDAY at checkout, then you'll get £5 off your first copy, bringing the price down to as low as $2.99. Plus, there's also special subscriber bundles, including our other TLDR products, which offer even greater value. Anyway, click the link in the description for all of the offers, and thank you for supporting the channel.